So arm training is one of those things that gets talked about a lot online, and it makes sense because frankly everyone wants bigger arms, and it's one of the first things that you see on someone that tells you that person has a really developed physique. But there seems to be a lot of confusion surrounding how to approach it properly. In my past several years of training, there have been different stages where I focused more on a strength or powerlifting style, really just focusing on the big barbell compounds. And during that time, I really wasn't isolating arms at all, with my thought process being that I would get plenty of secondary work in my biceps and triceps from my main pressing and pulling work. For strength purposes, that worked fine, but as I started to transition back to more of a bodybuilding or hypertrophy style of training, I realized that that just was not enough stimulus for my arms to get the growth that I was looking for. And I think for most people that aren't genetically gifted and just will have their arms grow off of anything, that's going to be the same case. I realized that I needed to approach my arm training the same way that I would approach my main compound lifts, which was to find specific exercises that I would use consistently as measures of progress that also really got me excited to perform those lifts and to make that progress over time. So the lifts that I found myself gravitating towards were for the biceps preacher curls and for the triceps lying tricep extensions or the skull crusher. So with the preacher curl, I found first of all it's very easy to standardize. I think in a lot of curl variations, there's a lot of room for things to shift and change as the loads start to get heavier and as you really start to get into those grindy reps. A well-performed preacher curl, you can just drape your arms over the pad, extend the arm, flex the elbow, and you're pretty much good. You've got to get pretty crazy to really mess it up. But beyond that, I just really found myself enjoying it. I can get in position, grip the bar hard, control the eccentric, and just fight through that positive until my biceps really have nothing left. And I found myself really enjoying it, but also feeling extremely productive when the set was done. And that was a big thing that got me motivated to really push that movement hard. However, I didn't slide into the easy bar preacher curl immediately because I was dealing with a very chronic wrist issue in my left wrist. For quite a while, I was not able to perform the easy bar curl without any sort of wrist pain. So I had to settle on the dumbbell preacher curl for quite a while because I just found myself not agitating the wrist in that motion, whether that's because of the complete freedom of movement that each hand has, or having to go lighter on the load because you just can't move as much with the dumbbell as you can the easy bar. I'm not sure, but I really did the dumbbell preacher curl for quite a while, really enjoyed it for a lot of the same reasons. But as the wrist got better, I found myself gravitating back towards the easy bar, and that easy bar preacher curl has become my go-to, again, as my tool of measurement for my overall bicep strength and growth, and it is a movement that I have thoroughly enjoyed and is a staple in my program. And the preacher curl is something that I've been able to push extremely hard. I had a set just a few sessions ago where I had one of the nastiest grinds I've probably ever had. It was like 6 seconds just stuck in that position. I really thought that I had the rep, but it just didn't happen. So you can push this movement extremely hard, but with the way that you're locked into that pad, you're just glued there, and as you can see, like my head's shaking, my knees are wobbling around, but my actual upper arm where the work is happening is rock solid and locked in. So all of that intense stress is hitting right in the target area. And it's not that I'm explicitly trying to go to failure every time that I do one of these sets. I'm striving for 0 reps in reserve, so taking everything that I've got there but still being able to complete that last rep. It's just sometimes when you're taking it that far, you misjudge and you can't make it all the way. Totally fine. I don't think there's anything magical or extremely special about failing in and of itself, but being able to really push and get close, I do think is important. Now, for the triceps, it's been a little bit of a different story. It really took some time and experimentation to figure out what was the right lift that met that same thing, was standardizable, consistent, but felt good and just clicked with my tricep training. So ultimately I did just land on the basic skull crusher, flat on the bench, bar to the forehead, but I did experiment with various angles, a little bit of incline here and there, some overhead tricep extensions, more of a French press style, but I did find myself running into a little bit of shoulder issues on this right side. I found overhead work consistently to really start to agitate that issue. So I knew that that was going to be a no-go for a movement that I was trying to hit hard consistently. So I just brought it back to the flat skull crusher. and I've had a lot of success with that movement. Again, feeling productive, getting good consistent work in the triceps. I will say that for that movement, that's one I've found to be most beneficial after I've already done some pressing and still doing several warm-up sets to really make sure that those elbows are warm and ready to handle that load, because there are some potential elbow issues that can rise up on that. I haven't dealt with that too badly myself, but that's just one I can feel I need to be a little bit more warmed up on. So with both of these movements, the preacher curl and the skull crusher, they're both old school movements that are time tested. There have been many great bodybuilders who've developed excellent arms using these movements. The other thing is they are very easy to standardize. Again, with the preacher curl, start at the top, extend, bring it back up, stay against the pad, and you're good to go. With the skull crusher, locked out roughly above shoulders, touch the forehead with the bar, and then back up, and you're good. Similar to touching the chest on the bench press, you know when you've met the end range. Now on the skull crusher, some people will kind of hover above the forehead to make sure that they don't pop themselves in the head, and I understand why, but I have found that making a conscious effort to touch the forehead with each rep, one, ensures that consistent range of motion, but also forces you to stay a bit more controlled on the eccentric, particularly in that end range, to where you're not popping yourself in the head. So I think it's more beneficial to actually touch than to just come close. And another thing with these movements is the resistance profile is great. They're more of a mid to lengthen biased resistance profile, which just works really well for hypertrophy and feels extremely productive. And I have a whole video planned for the resistance profile and stretch versus squeeze topic, so that'll be coming up soon. But I do think that spending more of your energy there is typically going to be a better idea, and these movements accomplish that. But all of that aside, again, I just really enjoy these movements. I get amped, I get excited to attack these sets and really put a high level of effort into it, and seeing them progress over time gets me excited. So that's going to just make my training better by default and makes me work the arms extremely hard. That all being said, these are not the only movements that I use for biceps and triceps. I still have other isolation exercises that I use and that I do enjoy and push very hard. But these are my staples. These are the ones I'm keeping the closest eye on and ensuring that these definitely happen, and I'm striving for progress as much as possible on these particular lifts. And the progress is slow, it takes time, but frankly, it's not that much slower from progressing my other compound lifts, especially because I'm using microplates to really not bite off more than I can chew at a time. You're obviously not going to be able to handle nearly the amount of load in an isolation lift, especially a strict one like a preacher curl, as you are a big compound lift. So I think microplates are very important for being able to not have as drastic of a jump, because that is going to be a much higher percentage of a smaller amount of weight adding 5 more pounds onto the bar than it is on a higher amount of load. So I think that the microplates have been a great tool, and I'd highly recommend them. So when it comes to the programming side, frankly, biceps and triceps, they really follow the same fundamentals of hypertrophy growth as any other muscle group. You need to load the target muscle with a high level of tension, with a consistent, standardizable technique in a reasonable rep range. And for me, that tends to be around 8 to 15 reps, sometimes a little lower, sometimes a little higher, but I'm usually within that range, which I know may sound kind of big, but it just doesn't have to be a super small window. Anything within that reasonable range is going to do really well. And I find that to be extremely productive without beating up the joints too much. And as far as volume goes, I think that's one of the things that people get hung up on a lot with arms, is that they need this crazy high amount of volume because it's a smaller muscle group or whatever, and it doesn't really make sense, especially when you consider how much secondary work is already taking place from your compound lifts. There's going to be a lot of overlap there. So even if you're doing a more reasonable amount of volume for your bicep and triceps, which I recommend, you need to be careful and take into consideration how much overlapping volume you have from your main pressing and pulling, particularly from an overuse standpoint. If you're really starting to feel achy elbows, achy wrists, achy shoulders, any of that can be a sign that you're doing too much and you need to back off in some capacity. If arms themselves are a #1 priority for you, you may need to pull back on the volume on some of your compound lifts, or switch some of those sets to more isolation type movements like chest flies or straight arm pull downs, to where you're not overloading those biceps and triceps with so much volume, even if some of it's secondary. So I do think it's a much better idea to keep your volumes in the more moderate range, and how high that needs to be will depend person to person. But I think the more important thing to look at is the intensity. And I'm not a HIIT guy, that's not my thing, but I do think that the intensity, that proximity to failure, is going to be much more important. And then the amount of volume that you need from there, just think of that more as the appropriate dose, the amount that you need of that intense work to make sure that you're progressing. And that may only be a couple sets, maybe 2, 3, combined with the other secondary work that you're getting in your compound movements. And again, when it comes to that intensity, I really find myself shooting for 0 reps in reserve. I'm trying to take it to the house and get as much out of it as I can every set. Make sure you're warm, make sure that your technique is on point. On something like a preacher curl, where it can be a little more intense on the elbow joint when you're not used to it, I would start on the higher end of that rep range that I mentioned, so closer to 10 or 15, to make sure that the load that you're using has to be lighter, so that you can really ensure that your elbows are ready for that sort of stress. But I've really found no elbow issues pushing these movements extremely hard. As long as you approach it smart and warm up properly, take your time building the loads up, you should be able to really grind through these. And again, leave nothing in the tank. You don't have to go all the way to failure every time. I don't think that there's anything magical about it, but it's not a bad idea to take it there sometimes and ensure that what you have in your head of 0 reps in reserve is actually that, because you might be holding back more than you realize. And if you take it all the way until you literally can't lift that bar anymore, that's a good test every once in a while to make sure that you're doing what you need to do. I talked earlier about how if arms are your highest priority, it might be a good idea to put them in the front of your workout. I know that typically arm isolation tends to come after the larger muscle groups of the chest and back, so that there's no interference. And I do think that by and large that's smart. But I've approached it both ways. There was quite a while where I was doing my bicep and tricep work at the beginning of the workout and then hitting my compounds. And I think that's a really good idea, to give everything that you've got while you're fresh to the biceps and triceps to make sure you're getting the most out of it. But especially as you advance, you develop that ability to be able to continue to push hard even on the back end of your workout, as long as you're resting appropriately. So right now I'm on a push-pull legs upper lower split, and I do train my arms on the back end of my push, pull, and my upper days. I still find that I have extremely productive sets for my biceps and triceps. Again, just resting appropriately, but also not overstuffing my workout with volume, both on the front end with my compound lifts, but also on the back end with my arm training. Approaching it with fewer sets and really being able to push it hard has done the best for my continued growth in the biceps and triceps. So yeah, that's really it. I mean, when it comes to training arms, treat them basically like you would any other muscle group. A moderate amount of volume, a high level of intensity, and find exercises that you can use to measure your progress over time that you really enjoy and get you excited to train these muscles. So if you guys have any questions, leave them down in the comments and let me know what your favorite arm exercises are. What are you hitting for biceps? What are you hitting for triceps? Do you enjoy it? Do you find it productive? Let me know your thoughts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Thanks.